We just went on a pedal paddle pedal adventure, and with 10 miles of it being on water, I had to find a way to transport my fat bike on my kayak. This is a quick video to share my setup and a little bit of how it worked, in case it gives any of you some ideas if you plan on doing something similar in the future. My goal was to mount my RSD Mayor Fat Bike onto my Crescent UltraLite sit on top kayak, and then paddle 10 miles down the river and across open water without capsizing. Now, the likelihood of you having the same kayak as me is relatively slim, but there are a lot of kayaks set up with gear tracks or rail systems. If you don't have a rail system, you can add one from someone like Yak Attack. Once a rail system's in play, there are a number of mounting options. The initial option I tried to pursue was to bolt a fork mount across the rail system. Unfortunately, my kayak deck is too short and my wheelbase is too long on my fat bike to get it stable. So instead, I decided to find a way to mount a bike tray across the rear of the deck. There are a lot of bike tray options out there. I ended up using a 1-up flush mount roof rack. The reason I chose this tray is because these mounting blocks are infinitely adjustable and slide along this track, which allows me to adjust to the width of the rear of my kayak deck. They also rotate. And so the rail system on the back of my kayak is not parallel, and so that's important for alignment. The flush mount hardware that came with the bike tray didn't fit the gear rack rails on my kayak, so I bought some additional carriage bolts and washers to mount everything up securely. Here's a quick breakdown of the hardware that I used. 4 stainless steel carriage bolts, 1/4 inch by 20, 1.5 inches long. If I were to buy these again, I would actually buy them 1/4 inch shorter, 1.25 inches long. The 1.5 inch bolts came a little bit close to hitting the side rails on the bike tray. I could have gotten away with a shorter option. 4 stainless steel 1/4 inch by 20 hex nuts, 4 stainless steel 1/4 inch standard split lock washers, and 4 stainless steel 1/4 inch fender washers. I also drilled out some nylon round stock that I had in order to make bushings to fill in the void in the 1-up mounting blocks for an extra snug fit. I don't have a good source for these nylon pieces. They were originally intended to be TV wall mount spacers, I believe. If you have access to a 3D printer or someone who can print you something, that might be another way to do this. All right, in order to mount the 1-up bike tray to the kayak, I slid the tray mounting blocks in to align with the width of the T-slot rails, and then I rotated the 1-up flush mount brackets to align with the angle of the rails, and then tightened everything down. Once everything was mounted up, I experimented a little bit with finding the balance point of the bike when it was sitting across the rear of the tray. There was some room to adjust the bike left to right before I locked it into the tray, which made it a little bit easier to balance as I didn't have to constantly shift the actual tray to find the balance point. Because this is a sit-on-top kayak, I knew that by mounting the bike so high above the waterline, I would be raising my center of gravity. So once I got the bike as balanced as possible left to right, I tried to offset the high center of gravity by packing some of my heavier items like clean water into the nose of the kayak. I was really hoping that that, paired with my body weight, would be just enough to have a semi-stable boat. For my first test on the water, I didn't know what to expect. So when I found that the boat was relatively stable, I was definitely relieved. With a quick test under my belt, I decided I was good enough for the adventure, and so a few days later, I stashed my kayak at the drop point with this exact setup. All right, so I'll share just a few observations of how this setup performed now that I used it. Balancing the bike left to right across the kayak is definitely important. If you have a narrower kayak and it isn't very stable, you might need to use some kind of outrigger to further stabilize the sway. I had a backup plan to mount boat bumpers to the bottom corners of the bike tray if my original setup wasn't stable enough as is. I also found that getting as much weight as possible down low below the waterline was important to help counterbalance the high center of gravity. After a few close calls, I found I had to be extra careful not to snag these corners of the tray on any rocks or sticks when out on the water. If I had a longer kayak, I think carrying a bike on a fork mount riding on the rear deck may be a lighter overall option, and the center of gravity would be lower due to the removal of the front wheel. With the bike being mounted across the rear deck, I noticed some headwind when paddling across open water. Paddling was more difficult, but certainly not impossible. The end result, it got the job done, it looked pretty incredible, and it made for a lot of great comments from fellow boaters. I wouldn't take this out on any water above a Class 2 without some other modifications, but that's not in the plans right now. I hope you can get out and enjoy the trails. We'll see you next time.